morning, everyone. My name is Whitaker. I'm the communications coordinator at the Alliance. Thank you to our first-time Summit sponsor, Summit Livestock Facilities, for the delicious breakfast we just enjoyed. So this morning's sessions will align with the protect part of the Alliance mission. No one wants to be a target. We help to shield stakeholders from damaging blows of misinformation by activist groups with the mission and motive of destroying animal agriculture. The Alliance works to provide farm security and crisis management resources and recommendations to our members by relying on our network of crisis management and security experts. We have more than 70 profile reports outlining activist, environmental, and animal rights groups that outline each group's mission and key projects. If you attended last year's summit, you recall one of our Protect sessions outlined how animal rights organizations are attempting to use religion to promote their agenda by producing Sunday school content, meeting with denomination leaders, and misrepresenting Scripture. After the Alliance identified that trend, we took action. We developed an Animals and Religion working group, and from that working group, we've developed a plan to push back against those activists. Our plan includes a toolkit of resources for anyone in the animal ag industry to use to help counter this in their communities, including talking points and letter to the editor templates. For more information about these resources, you can connect with any one of the Alliance staff members. And so this morning, we'll be diving into other activist strategies and looking how the Alliance and all of you can take action and work to protect our industry. Now I'll welcome Summit moderator Tyne Morgan back to the podium to kick us off.
Thanks so much, Casey. I'm excited to get day 2 kicked off. But before we do that, just want to say a few words. You know, a lot that I'm hearing this week is basically that agriculture needs a perception change, right? I had an analyst on my program about a couple months ago, and he said, you know, Tyne, I think our markets in general need a perception change. And I said, well, what do you even mean by that? He said, well, look at the crude oil market. Supply and demand, we didn't really see anything change, but people thought it was going to change, and we saw this huge run-up in crude oil prices. And he said that's exactly what we need with commodity prices right now. We need people to think that the supply and the demand is changing, and then maybe we'll get some life in these commodity prices. And I thought to myself, well, that's exactly what we need in agriculture. I mean, what we do, we're proud of what we do. And unfortunately, the majority of America now, they don't live on farms. They're 2, 3, sometimes 4 generations removed from agriculture. We're proud of what we do. We just need them to have that perception change, really understand and know what we do as farmers and ranchers, and that we care about the products that we produce. So the conversation about food, we hear about all of these labels and how confusing labels can be. A couple months ago, I was invited by Land O'Lakes and Winfield to go down to South by Southwest. Has anyone ever been to South by Southwest? A couple people in the room? I fit in at the National Farm Machinery Show. I learned I do not fit in at South by Southwest. So I get this call asking if I would moderate this panel at South by Southwest. I think, being a young female, a mom of 2 daughters, they thought maybe I could connect with a different type of audience. So I go home and I talk to my husband and I said, listen, I got this call. It's over a weekend. What do you think? And he goes, are you serious? You just got invited to South by Southwest? Well, he's a Texan, right? So he understands what it is. I had no, I had to Google South by Southwest. That's how naive I am. So then my bio shows up on the website, and I took a screenshot on my phone and texted it to him. He said, Tyne, you finally made it. Really? Because I'm speaking at South by Southwest? I host a show of 500,000 viewers. Nope, I have not made it until I talk at South by Southwest. So we get down there, and Winfield and Land O'Lakes, kudos to them. They knew that this conversation about food and what farmers and ranchers do needed to happen outside of just agriculture. So they pitched this to the South by Southwest team, and they said, this sounds great. Their presentation was on uncharted waters and talking about how farmers and ranchers better utilize every drop of water that we have today. But they said, this is pretty one-sided, so we actually need you to invite someone else to maybe give an alternative view. And so they did some research, and they found a guy at MIT who runs their ag lab. Did anyone know that MIT actually has an ag lab? I did not. It is impressive, let me tell you. And Caleb Harper is his name, and not only is he extremely smart, but he can communicate really, really well. So Caleb comes and he talks and just, from a different point of view, they're at MIT and they're starting to grow leafy greens and things in this lab. And, in typical MIT fashion, they gather all this data. Thousands and thousands and thousands of data points. I can't imagine. I mean, it just makes my head hurt thinking about it. So he was talking to the audience and he was talking about food and, really helping them grasp what it takes to produce food today. And he said, we hear about these labels, right? And you have an issue with food. Maybe you think we produce too much food. Maybe you think we produce not enough food. Maybe you think we need more GMOs. Maybe you think we shouldn't have GMOs. He talked about there's an issue. Everyone has an issue with food. It just depends on what your issue is. But he said USDA did a survey asking, just asking consumers, how many of you want your food labeled if it contains GMOs? How many, asking about labels. So one of the questions was, how many of you want your food labeled if it contains DNA? It takes a second. Let me repeat it. How many of you want your food labeled if it contains DNA? 80% said yes. 80% of consumers surveyed said they want their food labeled if it contains DNA. And his point was, you have to remember that when we're talking about food, 80% of the population doesn't even understand what's in their food today. Right? DNA, something that's so simple, they don't even understand that food contains DNA. And so you talk about GMOs, you talk about antibiotics, you talk about all these things. You have to understand that we have to bring it down to a level that everyone can understand. And I thought that was a really good point. We have all these labels. I mean, labeled contain DNA, and they think that that's healthier for them. So that's a conversation that we need to change. But today we know that we're in the news. Maybe we're in the news more than we think or less than we think. But here's some of the articles in the past few weeks. Tyson Foods to eliminate antibiotics in chicken, right? That was recently. Why we should tax meat that contains antibiotics. And a Florida teacher accused ag students of being murderers. These are the headlines. This was a headline that popped up in the Associated Press, I think it was last week or the week before. These are the headlines that we're seeing. Now, we can't control all of these conversations, but I do believe we can bring these conversations full circle, and it all starts right here by taking action. This is one of my favorite quotes because it's true in agriculture, right? Nothing in agriculture is easy. When we look at, I mentioned it yesterday, when we look at the markets, when we look at weather, it's never easy. But we grow when we face challenges. And boy, are we facing challenges today. Not only with commodity prices, but when we look at the messaging that we see in the media that we can't always control, we face challenges, but we will grow and we will become stronger because of it. So election. I was telling this story to someone yesterday. I was actually in Las Vegas the night of the election. Should have bet on it, but I did not. And I was with a group of dairy producers. So I'd never been to Vegas before, but we're on kind of the strip watching the election coverage happen, and they're playing, I think it was CNN was the coverage that they were playing on this Jumbotron. And you start to see the votes come in, and you just kind of start to see these anchors' faces, like, oh my goodness, President Donald Trump, I mean, he's actually going to be president. You just watch the fear. And I saw one anchor even break down and cry the night of the election. Are you serious? We've forgotten about rural America. And when I talk to viewers across the country, I mean, I heard that all year long. My voice isn't being heard. We're kind of the silent majority, or the silent majority here. But I think if anything, what it proved election night is just because we don't have the loudest voice doesn't mean our voice isn't being heard. And I think election night, rural America proved that, right? And after that election, rural America received a ton of attention. And yesterday, talking with some of the folks at NPR, maybe those fireworks have kind of settled a little bit, but I do think there's a focus on rural America that was not there a year ago. And that's a good thing. When we look at the change at USDA, we have a new ag secretary in town last week. There was video of him. He took off his jacket, took off his tie, literally rolled up his sleeves and said, I'm ready to get to work. If you saw the faces of those at USDA, that's a bit of a change of former Secretary Tom Vilsack, right? That was a bit of a change. And you could see the folks at USDA were like, is this seriously happening? Did he just take off his suit and tie, or his tie and his suit coat, and talk about getting ready to get to work? But we've already seen him do that. He was in Kansas City last week. We've heard him talk about changing school lunch policy. We heard him say that he actually had an impact on NAFTA talk. He went down and sat with President Donald Trump and said, listen, you're talking about withdrawing from NAFTA. We can't do this. Look at your supporters here and look at the impact NAFTA is having, not only on farmers and ranchers, but rural economies all across the country. So I really do think that the tides are turning. And then I've talked to producers in California. You know, the weather, the moisture situation's improved. They feel like regulations are starting to ease. And one producer told me, I can smell change in the air. And it's good change. So the secret to change is to focus all of your energy not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And I don't think there's a better quote to talk about what we're doing today in animal agriculture. We can't fight the old. We can look at what happened. We can reflect on what happened. We can reflect on kind of some of the impacts that have occurred to animal agriculture in the past decade. But we really need to focus on what's happening tomorrow and building the new. And I mentioned it yesterday, but I think, you know, the tides are starting to turn. And resilience will continue to reign in agriculture. We'll have challenges. We know we'll have challenges, but we will come out better for it.